Welcome to the Analytical Scientist Video Application Notes with Marks International. This video application note describes how to comply with the new European Tobacco Product Directive and the United States FDA regulation of electronic nicotine delivery systems, or ENDS, with Caroline Widdowson. Before we begin, I'll quickly introduce Caroline. Dr. Caroline Widdowson is the Product Marketing Manager for Thermal Desorption at Marks International, a specialist manufacturer of analytical thermal desorption instrumentation, associated sampling equipment, and time-of-flight mass spectrometry. Caroline participates in many standards and regulatory committees, including CEN, ISO, ASTM, and BSI, and works closely with industry, test labs, and research institutes to equip and advise on the analysis of VOCs and SVOCs. Caroline, over to you.
Thanks, Rich. This short presentation will begin with an explanation of the current regulatory framework surrounding e-cigarettes, and then move on into details on sampling and analysis of the e-cigarette vapours, using grab sampling onto sorbent tubes, following with analysis using thermal desorption GCMS. The marked increase in popularity of e-cigarettes has in some part been attributed to the perception that they have a lower health risk than tobacco products. The widespread use of e-cigarettes has resulted in a high degree of scrutiny into the chemical compounds of the e-liquids that are vaporized. Typically, these are compounds such as propylene glycol, glycerol, nicotine, and different flavouring compounds. During the vaporization process, chemical transformations occur, meaning that some of the typical formulation studies are limited in their scope. Concerns about these health implications associated with vaping, the process of inhaling vapor from the e-liquid, has led to numerous new regulations, and we're going to have a look at two of those today, specifically affecting the nicotine-containing products. So the first of those is the EU Tobacco Product Directive, and the second is the US FDA regulation on ENDS, or electronic nicotine delivery systems. In 2016, the updated Tobacco Product Directive placed an obligation on manufacturers of e-liquids and e-cigarettes to report emissions data from every nicotine-containing e-liquid, specifically looking at the compounds formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, and acrolein, and then listing a couple of others as compounds of interest for the future. Additionally, in 2016, the US FDA extended its authority over regulations of tobacco products to include e-cigarettes. And this states that manufacturers need to report harmful or potentially harmful compounds resulting from the vapours. So how do we go about sampling the vapour from an e-liquid cigarette? Well, here we have an example of some of the apparatus that we used in this study. We've taken a grab sampler, or an EasyVoc, that's connected to a sorbent tube, which is one of our odour or sulphur inert coated stainless steel sorbent tubes, which is ideal for sampling compounds ranging in volatility from hydrocarbon C3 to C30. The grab sampler is drawn backwards, and a 50 milliliter sample is drawn from the e-cigarette onto the adsorbent tube. This takes about 4 seconds and is simulating a draw of an e-cigarette. That sorbent tube is then placed into a thermal desorption instrument and analysed using thermal desorption GCMS. So what happens once the tube is inside the thermal desorption unit? A flow of gas is passed through the sorbent tube, and the compounds of interest are swept from that tube onto a focusing trap. This focusing trap also contains multiple sorbents and traps the same range of analytes that the sorbent tube has trapped. At this point, we can split our sample and take some of that sample onto a clean adsorbent tube, and we call this recollection. And what that means is that we can reanalyze the sample at a later date. Once the sample is on the focusing trap, the flow of gas is reversed through that focusing trap, and our sample is taken to our GC column for analysis. At this point as well, we can also split our sample and take some of the compounds of interest onto a recollection tube. And this is termed our outlet split. So why would we want to do our quantitative recollection? This is the recollection of the split portion onto a clean adsorbent tube. There's three different things that we can look at. One of them is being able to reanalyze a valuable sample, so it's not a one-shot technique. Another is that we can validate the methodology and ensure that all the compounds of interest are being passed through the system without any concern of loss or reaction. And it also aids method development and troubleshooting, ensuring that we can pass our samples through the system correctly. To check the analytical capability of the system, a matrix match sample was loaded onto a sorbent tube using a calibration solution loading rig. This is a device which allows a validated injection of a sample onto a sorbent tube for checking the system. This standard contained 4 relevant e-cigarette impurities or additives, as well as the matrix compounds of interest. Once you're happy that your system is working correctly, we can then run the samples of interest. The first sample analysed was a tobacco-flavoured e-liquid, and it confirmed the presence of various levels of trace components, despite there being a really high concentration of propylene glycol and glycerol, the compounds that are used in major e-liquid components. We can also see the regulated compounds, acrolein and nicotine, as well as flavour and aroma compounds, such as levomethanol and vanillin. The second study used an e-liquid with a menthol and blueberry flavour. Initially, there was a high outlet split. So we showed this on the schematic of the thermal desorption. This is where a small portion of the sample is sent to the GCMS. We split some of the sample and recollect it onto a clean adsorbent tube. And this was used to quantify the higher loading compounds, including the methanol, which is compound 31, and nicotine, compound 39. And we then followed that with a lower outlet split of the recollected sample. This ensured a strong response from the lower level flavour compounds and allowed us to see those trace compounds even when there was a heavily overloaded capability of the propylene glycol and glycerol. It's worth noting in this analysis that we used inert-coated stainless steel tubes, and this combined with the inert flow path allowed us to have minimal loss of thermally labeled compounds, such as the sulfur species and monoterpenes, for example, alpha-pinene and beta-pinene, and other fragrance and flavour compounds. So as we've seen, the increased scrutiny of e-cigarette products due to health concerns has caused new regulation and new standard methods to be created. The sampling of e-cigarette vapours onto sorbent tubes is relatively simple and easy. It's a grab sample onto a sorbent tube followed by analysis with thermal desorption GCMS. And whilst this is suitable for assisting with compliance, it also allows us to detect a wide range of compounds for quality control, aroma profiling, and also for R&D purposes. If you would like to find out any more about this application, then please feel free to be in contact with us. All the contact details are on your screen now. Thank you very much for your time.